Good morning, good afternoon, to everyone. Good afternoon to the royals. Good afternoon, kings and queens of the land. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the liberated zones of Africa. Begin of us under the leadership of President Traore. Mali under the leadership of President Asim Goita. Um, uh, Nigerian. Um, Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all the liberated zone in South Africa. Good afternoon to the KZN. Good afternoon. My name is Mngoni Mkonto, and this is the Royal Opinion. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today, we are talking about, in discussion today, we are talking about the persecution of how did President Zuma survive his persecution. I I will refer to them as the enemies. How did President Zuma survive the persecution of the enemies? I'm not going to call them by their name, because if I call them by their name, this video uh, will not be. I'm sorry for the noise behind. If you are able to hear that. So today in discussion, we're talking about how did President Zuma survive the persecution by our enemies, by the enemies, because President Zuma has been persecuted by the enemies. Uh, in discussion today is how did President Zuma survive the persecution by the enemies? Um, where do I start? Let me start by sharing. Let me start by sharing the Zuma must fall.
Elsewhere, DA protesters gathered at Westgate.
Say this to you, we are not finished today. We are only beginning.
At Thule House, they were later joined in defense of their president. The police came to the rescue of a DA protester who was attacked by ANC supporters. ANC supporters continued to make their presence known through Johannesburg's CBD. In Pretoria, thousands of people gathered in and around Church Square. Key speakers, including Cope's Masuela Kota, addressed the crowd before the marchers made their way towards the Union building. Leading the marchers
and his friends, unfortunately, from the ANC and its alliance partners, we can never solve the crisis of 9 million people facing unemployment in this country. Your days are numbered. You are going to go. Where the flag? Your days, Zuma, are numbered. You are going to go.
once the speeches were
For the first time in the history of South Africa, for the first time in the history of white people in South Africa, for the very first time, for the very first time, white people protest. It has never happened before. White people, Jacob Zuma, they protested that President Zuma should be removed from his position. It was an, we can say, event, jubilant event, attended by all kinds of
over. In the Western Cape, 12,000 Cape Townians marched from Kaiserkracht Street to Parliament. It remained a largely peaceful protest as members from all sectors of society joined in on the procession. Speakers from Save SA and South Africa First addressed the crowds outside Parliament, stating that this was not a once-off activity and they would continue with their calls for Zuma to step down until he resigns.
It's important we take back our country, because this country, you, me, and some of the people are no longer with us, fought for this country. Yes. And now it's in the hands of a few individuals. Amen. And we are saying enough is enough is enough. Amandla! Amandla! Viva active citizens, viva! Viva! Viva active citizens, viva!
white people saying Amanda. For the first time in South Africa, white people saying Amanda. For the first time in South Africa, all organizations, all political parties, including the ANC, agrees that President Zuma should be removed. When did the persecution of President Zuma started? Let's look at the chronology. Let me read. I normally don't read, but today let me just read. In the run-up to the 2009 presidential election in South Africa, Jacob Zuma was simultaneously battling allegations of rape and corruption. towards the election in 2009, meaning just immediately after he won the ANC presidential election, allegations of rape against him. His problems begins years earlier. In 2005, he was charged with corruption for allegedly accepting bribes from a French army company, Thales. The charges were 783 charges. That's what they said. They said President Zuma has a generally corrupt relationship with Schabir Shaik. Nobody knows even up to today what is a generally corrupt relationship. President Zuma have repeatedly asked, what did I do? Nobody knows what President Zuma did. Everybody was just saying, let him be removed. But for what reason, nobody knew at that time, because nobody was talking about what is the reason President Zuma is being removed. Everybody was just, President Zuma is generally corrupt. He's just generally corrupt. So everybody was saying President Zuma should be removed for he is generally corrupt.
I said on several occasions that we were misled on President Zuma. Like
we were not misled. We're not misled. Everything else we articulated, it was a correct position.
Now, I've been party to the sinister agenda against Zuma and can only apologize for that. I'm not saying I'm suddenly his biggest fan, but it's time to admit I've been party to the unfairness along with my colleagues, with many of my colleagues, I should say.
So when they say they bought a house in Dubai for 500 million, someone says, how can a person buy a house of 500 million? It's not possible. No one can do that. But if you have pocketed more than 10 million, 500 million, if you have pocketed more than 10 billion, 500 million is nothing. You can afford to buy a house in Dubai. By the way, when I said Zuma went to Dubai into some unofficial trip to visit a factory of manufacturing of weapons, he did not only do that, he also visited the house. This house that you see, he went to visit the house.
But you would know that during President Zuma's presidency, there was a lot of falsehoods that were spread by the media, that is a house which is built in Dubai, like a huge mention of 400 million, all sorts of falsehoods, by the way. And we fell into that trap and joined into that nonsense of saying there's everything wrong with President Zuma. And then we called...
I don't regret our position that which we took against President Zuma at the time. And this I asked Floyd if he thinks he has forgiven us for what we have done to him. I don't think he has forgiven us for that. And it doesn't matter, but we were not misled. We're not misled. Everything else we articulated, it was a correct position of the EFF, and it remains the correct position of the EFF. Having developed those positions around Zuma as the EFF, we now say this guy must now be our leader.
And of course, during the tenure of our ANC weekly, there began to be some political and ideological differences, sometimes which were subjective in terms of how they got to be interpreted, because In all honesty, there was never a time where President Zuma got to interact with the entire National Executive Committee of the ANC. But those who were representing us then came with the report that no, Zuma is selling out, Zuma is doing this, Zuma. And of course, we're under the leadership of whoever was leading us at that particular moment. And then there was the issue of
Julius Malema?
Yes, was the president of the ANC at that time. And we viewed the ANC leadership according to what the leadership was saying, all of us, that no, there's a problem, then it's a problem in terms of how it got to transpire. And then, of course, the issue that you're making a reference to, then there was the issue as to what becomes the approach to the Libya no-fly zone issue, and then there was that difference which got to happen. And with time, you know, I must have to say this much more emphatically that, you know, if you are a honest political leader, you can't be presented with facts and proper historicization of what happened in the past and still want to believe in what you believed in before. I think Franz Fanon calls that a cognitive dissonance, where you just want to believe on one thing even when there are facts that are obtaining differently. What I know about President Zuma now is that he knows where the battle line is drawn. He knows that we are fighting this side as the anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti-neoliberal forces. And he knows who are our friends. That is why even his association with the progressive countries in the world gives testimony to that. There's never been an incident, not even a suspicion once, where President Zuma has been associated with the establishment, or the capitalist establishment, domestically, continentally and globally. He has always fought on the side of the people. And those are the politics that we associate
You understand.
with. But you would know.
President Zuma, being persecuted by our enemies, I will call them our enemies for the sake of this video. President Zuma being persecuted. Some of the people who persecuted President Zuma still hold the same view as they held before, even when the State Capture Commission went on and nothing came out of the State Capture Commission because it was designed to actually destroy President Zuma, even though it was aimed at him, but there was nothing that anybody could point that this what President Zuma has done to South Africa. And the fact that this State Capture Commission was set up, it assisted the clarity of South African. It assisted black South African to further receive clarity about President Zuma, because in the State Capture Commission, it was very clear that he was persecuted by the Judge President Hlophe, who ended up kidnapping him and took him to prison without trial and without him doing anything wrong. President Zuma was kidnapped by the mafia government of South Africa, or the judicial mafia government of South Africa, into prison in 2021 without him doing anything, because he is persecuted by our enemies. I call them our enemies. You know who they are. If you have checked our thumbnail, you will know who is our enemies there. I have to count my words when I'm on YouTube, because these people, they always ban the videos if we say something like that. So these enemies have been persecuting President Zuma. Immediately on in Polokwane, they brought charges of rape against him. After that, they brought charges of 783 charges of corruption against him. That's in 2005. In 2006, President Zuma was acquitted from rape. In 2006 September, they reinstated the corruption charges. In 2008, the court declared that the persecution of President Zuma was invalid and threw out the charges. They threw 2008 September. The court declared that the charges were actually politically motivated, and they were thrown out of the court. But it couldn't. And then President Zuma, when he became president, and instead of going to the West, when he became president, instead of going to the West, he went to form the BRIC nation. President Zuma is the one who formed the BRIC alliance. He is the one who went to China and speak to the Chinese president, and he went to Brazil and spoke to President Lula, and then he went to Russia again and spoke to President Putin, and to India. And at the end, all of these leaders were met in France, and when they met in France, President Zuma raised the issue when they were together there that he wanted the BRIC countries to start an economic alliance, because the BRIC alliance forms half of the world population. It's almost half of the world population. So the dominance of the dollar was not reasonable according to President Zuma. And then he requested that the nations, the four nations, the five nations, forms an alliance, which was Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So he suggested that the strength of the dollar should be reduced. He suggested the de-dollarization of the um, countries, of the BRIC countries, which is almost implemented today as we speak. President Zuma suggestion that the BRICS countries should de-dollarize is almost getting implemented today, because President Zuma has won against the enemies. So immediately he took that step. They went on to put more charges against President Zuma, to uh, put reinstate criminal charges against President Zuma. The system was terrified. They wanted him removed. That's why they started to sponsor the youth league. They started to sponsor the youth league. That's why some of the youth leaders were bought. Um, uh, some of the youth leaders sold out. The CIC sold out of the struggle for emancipation of black people. He went for removal of President Zuma. He went for the removal of President Zuma. Influence, the sponsored. This was a sponsored uh, campaign. It was a sponsored campaign by the enemies to confuse black people who are their correct leaders. Sponsored campaign. The SABC, Leanne Menas finally admitting that her and many of her colleagues were involved in a campaign against President Zuma. Makosi Kosa as well admitted that she was involved in a campaign against President Zuma unknowingly, that it was lies. Even today, none of President Zuma's crimes have been proven. None of President Zuma's crimes have been proven, but even today, his enemies are still holding on to say President Zuma is a criminal. None of the people who say President Zuma is a criminal, if you ask them what did he do, nobody knows what President Zuma did. Even the people who were protesting, I was part of the people who were protesting in 2018 against President Zuma. I did not know what he did. Just like everybody who was protesting against President Zuma, eh, everybody just wanted President Zuma removed because of the campaign was well run, well sponsored. The leaders were well paid to take this protest forward. The CIC have once announced the CIC Julius Malema has once announced that the members of the EFF are going to occupy ABSA. Some years ago, I think it was in 2017, if not 2018, he said we will go and occupy ABSA and we will not announce. Up to today, ABSA has not been occupied by the EFF members and by the CIC. And ABSA will never be occupied by the EFF members or the CIC, because the CIC is actually running the ABSA campaign against President Zuma. The banks does not want President Zuma to come back, but President Zuma has defeated all of these campaigns because after he was removed as president, he just went underground. What he was well taught to do, he went underground, taught by the streets, taught. President Zuma is still one example of the African education. He is the only example, let me say, the only example which remains of people who have received African education without being diluted by the colonial education. President Zuma's intellectual level is hard to match because his education is African. He's been taken to be a shepherd. Very important exercise. Because in the forest, you learn how to live with the animals. You learn how to interact with animals. You learn to respect that also the animals are part of life. Thank you very much, Queen Cynthia Malope, for joining. She says, you then find CIC You then find the CIC of the EFF wanting us to believe that he still stands for his position that Zuma was in the wrong. But at the same time, he speaks about Zuma forgiveness. Yes, he speaks about Zuma forgiveness because he knows he did wrong to Zuma. If he speaks about Zuma for um, forgiveness, it shows that he knows he's guilty of persecuting President Zuma. And I think President Zuma has not forgiven him, but President Zuma is a very kind man. It does not matter. It does not matter. He forgives everybody. He forgives all the black people who betrayed him. He wants them to come to the MK party in order to unite against the real enemy, which is the people who are actually paying them to persecute President Zuma. Behind them, there are people who are paying them. So the CIC, Julius Malema, is still holding on to his sellout position. Is still holding on to his sellout position. Lord, akufani nawe bhuti. I cried when Zuma was removed. I never believed anything that was said about Zuma. I actually believed, I believed a lot. Actually, President Zuma is the one who uh, opened my eyes in a lot of these issues, because I started investigating about President Zuma and his crimes, but I couldn't find any after believing that he was actually guilty of something. For a long time, I believed actually that President Zuma was one man, though I actually loved him before. But at some stage, I was I was convinced that there's something wrong with President Zuma, because the campaign was well run, and there's a lot of people who were confused about President Zuma. I must say, there were a lot of people who were confused about President Zuma as well. So President Zuma has defeated the deep state. President Zuma has emerged after organizing the BRICS to become what it is. Now President Zuma is going to be the first president of the truly liberated South Africa from the Queen. Like it or not, believe it or not, the MK party is going to take over power in South Africa and it will govern. Get used to this idea, because it is going to happen. We declare in this channel, the Royal Opinion declares that President Zuma is going to be the first president of the truly democratic South Africa, because he's defeated the white people, he's defeated the enemies. They arrested him and took him to jail without him doing anything. They couldn't keep him, they couldn't contain him in the cell, because President Zuma is bigger than their cells. So they couldn't contain him in their prisons, because President Zuma is bigger than the prison walls. The walls were too small for him. President Zuma is an elephant. So he bulldozed the doors and the walls. They break because of his strength. President Zuma defeated the enemies. And President Zuma is going to be the first black president to lead a truly liberated South Africa from the Queen, from the British colony, and from the American imperial chains. That is what is going to happen. The people of South Africa have already realized that President Zuma, even if they can try and maintain a campaign against a propaganda against President Zuma, even if they can try and do that, the more they try and do that, the more President Zuma becomes even more popular to even his enemies. President Zuma is like a rock which has been set off from the top of the mountain, which cannot be stopped until it reaches the valley. His destination is the uh, Union Building. They call it the Union Building because it was the union between the Dutch and the British. So it is called the Union Building even today because we are still under the British Empire. President Zuma is going to go into the Union Building and change it to become the Zuma Building. The Union Building should be should be named after President Zuma. Many things will be named after President Zuma. Enemies, whether they like it or not. President Zuma is going to reign. President Zuma will rule the country. Umkhonto wesizwe will implement their policies. They are going to change South Africa. They are going to expropriate the land without compensation. They are going to change the constitution. Not even change they are going to scrap the constitution. Let me use their language. They are going to scrap the constitution and replace it with a constitution that would be favorable to black people. They are going to scrap all the sections of the constitutions that are still favorable to apartheid. It will happen because the President Zuma is going to uh, take over as president once again, like it or not. The case against the IEC is still going with the MK party. The case of vote rigging is not spoken about in the mainstream media because they are in trouble. The IEC have asked for postponement to respond because they have to file a responding affidavit. So they've requested a postponement. If they request a postponement, it shows that they respond. They don't have to respond to what they want to the questions. They don't have the responses to the questions. MK party is likely to win that case, or is likely to be openly robbed, and all South Africans will be able to see that this is a persecution of black people. Everybody will be able to see. President Zuma is patiently awaiting for the court date. The difference between President Zuma and what is happening in Mozambique, the revolution which is led by President Zuma and what is happening in Mozambique under Venecio Bila Mondlane. The revolution which is led by Mondlane in Mozambique, the difference is experience. President Zuma has the experience and the intelligence. Of course, Mondlane has declared a crippling protest against uh, the outcomes of the elections in Mozambique. It means they will close the border in South Africa. They will close the border, and that is very critical. It's crippling for the system because all the minerals that they are mining in Limpopo and Mpumalanga, they have to transport them to Mozambique because that is the closest port. Durban is very far. The white people don't necessarily have borders. It's only us who've got borders. So the closest border, the closest port for Mpumalanga and Limpopo is Maputo. So they take the minerals through the Maputo port to Europe. So when the borders are closed, then the people who've got power will come and talk because that's what they do. They co-opt them into the structure of power. So now the difference between the two leaders, President Zuma knows. So the difference is President Zuma is patient. And President Zuma knows how the system works because when you go and protest, they have the system to deal with you. The system has already been set up. The soldiers are there to, uh, in every country, the soldiers are not there to protect their citizens. The soldiers are there to uh, fight the citizens when they revolt against the system. That's what happens every time, and that is their work. Uh, Many of the soldiers, they don't know any mission other than uh, fighting their own people when they revolt against the system. So they will open fire on people because that's their job. That's what they have to do. That's what they did in 2021 when people go and protest. They kill them and nothing happens and nothing meaningful will ever happen because that is the system. That's how it works. 373 people were killed in 2021, but they say they died because like as if like they died out of sickness while they were actually many of them were gunned down, were killed by the system, by the soldiers, by the police. Many of them were killed, but then uh, they say they died as if they died natural, and then everything is forgotten. Nobody is charged about that. So President Zuma knows how all of this works. Um, he's not calling. He's calling for calm, for people not to go to the street to go and protest, because he knows when you go and protest, they are going to kill a lot of people and then pin the issue on him, arrest him for inciting violence. So he knows this is the plan. So because he knows that plan, President Zuma is urging everybody to be patient and to wait for the court system. While he knows the court system has already been compromised, but he wants people to see, he wants to first expose the system, uh, so that everybody, every black person is convinced that this is an evil system. There's a lot of black people who still think that this system is still a good system. So he has to convince a lot of black people that this is an evil system. That's why he asked for people to be patient. Uh, and President Zuma is going to take over because of this. I have never believed before that President Zuma can take over without the barrel of the gun. I thought it has to be the guns. But now I can see that President Zuma's plan is more superior and his logic is working. Thank you very much for all those who joined the session. Click the like button and subscribe. Those who are coming here visiting for the first time, let's click the like button and subscribe. Thank you very much. We will end the live stream here.